and cable TV operations. They'll also be looking at how many subscribers Disney added to its streaming platforms, including ESPN and Hulu. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Steve Rappaport. This is Bloomberg. Stay tuned for more Bloomberg Markets coming up with Paul Sweeney right after this.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks kicking off today's trading with some muted moves so far. Investors awaiting fresh readouts and inflation. Of course, we'll get the CPI tomorrow morning. That's going to feed into expectations for future Fed interest rate policy. On deck for later today, Walt Disney reports earnings. That comes after the close of markets. Oil prices, they're rising right now. The best performing industry group in the S&P 500. In fact, that belongs to energy. Now, on that front, Bloomberg Economics is writing that the Fed's own model suggests they're slightly more likely to react to a positive commodity price shock, rising prices, by cutting rates rather than raising them. Right now, S&P 500 is 7 points lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 13 points. The NASDAQ 100 right now 81 points lower. That is down about 0.5%. The microphone that Cardi B recently threw at a fan in Las Vegas has been sold on eBay. After 122 offers, the winning bid came in at $99,900. The nice part about this, all the proceeds, they say, will be given to charity. And I must admit, when I saw the headline Cardi B, I thought that was a medical procedure.
I know you did.
I didn't know that was a singer.
Singer.
JT, come on now.
It's just there's definitely a generational thing going on.
Man of another time.
He really
That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Can I just say, I got a text from my mother recently. Whenever I fill in with you, Paul, and she brought up John Tucker. She said, I'm getting more and more intrigued with John Tucker. He's like Clark Kent. There's a lot going under that slick veneer.
Oh, man, you got a fan out there.
Yeah, that prompts a couple of questions. Is Mom single? Is she rich?
No, she's not. My parents have been married for
Moving
over
on.
40 years.
Nice. Good job. All right, John, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Jess Mint and Paul Sweeney here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. One of the stories markets are dealing with today is some economic data coming out of China, a little bit disappointing. Consumer and producer prices fell together for the first time in 2020, a deflation cycle, you could call it. Tom Orlick, he knows a thing or two about China. He lived and worked in Beijing for many years. He is the chief economist for Bloomberg Economics. He joins us via Zoom. Hey, Tom, when we all came into 2023, I think most companies, most countries around the world said, hey, one of the stories of 2023 is going to be China reopening, and that's going to be good for the global economy. That's not really playing out, is it? Tell us what's going on with China and its economy.
So I think that's right, Paul. If we go back to the end of 2022, start of 2023, there was a lot of optimism. China exited its COVID lockdowns quicker than most people expected, and the rebound in the first quarter was stronger than most people expected. What we're seeing, though, as we push into the second half of the year, is that rebound really didn't have legs. And very quickly, the story on China swung back to all of those significant structural problems: high debt, massive overcapacity in the real estate sector, growing tensions in relations with the United States, demographic drag. And these factors are dragging on growth, and they're also, as you know, dragging on prices. So in addition to all of those structural problems, China now battling with deflation as well.
Also, consumer spending not being quite as strong as economists were anticipating. Why is that?
So I think when you think about the household consumption story, there's a couple of significant challenges. So the first challenge is, well, when the economy is not doing very well, then households don't have big earnings growth, they don't have confidence in their future earnings, and that weighs on their consumption. You've probably seen there's 20% youth unemployment in China right now. If young people are worried about being unemployed, they're not going to be hitting the shops, they're not going to be spending on Taobao. The second big problem is that China's households have a lot of their wealth tied up in real estate. And when real estate prices were rising, as they did for much of the last 20 years, well, households felt richer, they wanted to go and spend some of that wealth. Now, huge uncertainty about the real estate sector, prices in some second-tier cities already heading down. That's a blow to household wealth, means they're less likely to spend.
Hey, Tom, some of these headwinds you're highlighting here, they seem pretty long-term entrenched, not something easily fixed. What, in fact, can the government do, and will the government do?
So we've already seen the government starting to shift policy. We've seen mini rate cut by the PBOC. We've seen the PBOC, China Central Bank, also encouraging the commercial banks to guide mortgage rates lower. That's meant to give a bit more juice to the real estate sector. We've heard the government talk about the importance of boosting consumption. So far, though, whilst there's been a sort of a steady drumbeat of pro-growth policy announcements, it's really not adding up to the size of stimulus, which I think markets are looking for to turn the short-term narrative on China around.
China is the world's, as you know, second largest economy behind the United States. How much of an issue with this slowing growth could it have more globally when you have the U.S. seeing, obviously, when you think about these inflation numbers, we're getting another reading tomorrow with CPI, but improving?
Yeah, so if we come back to the beginning of the year, there was a fear that a surging Chinese recovery will be great news for China, but by juicing commodity prices, by pushing up prices for oil and soft commodities like soybeans, it could give extra legs to the global inflation story. And that potentially could keep the Fed and the ECB and the Bank of England hiking for longer than they would otherwise have had to do. Well, here we are at the start of August, and the Chinese economy is pretty clearly run out of steam, and the stimulus so far has been not entirely missing in action, but still not adequate to the task. What that means is that impulse to global commodity prices if anything, is in the other direction.
Do you
So China isn't making the Fed's job harder by adding to global inflation. If anything, it's making it a little bit easier by subtracting from global inflation.
Do you think that investors in the US are too optimistic about a soft landing and maybe not thinking about some of the issues that are potentially going on in China and how that could obviously affect, like you were talking about, the Fed's interest rate path?
So that's a really good question. I mean, I think there's just a lot of optimism about the US right now, and clearly a bunch of the recent data sort of supports that soft landing narrative. Inflation's been coming down. Labor markets have remained remarkably robust. At the same time, if we think about some of the dynamics in the United States, if we think about what's happening with credit growth and banks' willingness to make loans, if we think about the amount of distress amongst household borrowers, there are some early indicators supporting, continuing to support a hard landing narrative here. And then if we think more broadly, if we think around the world, well, China's growth slowing is giving the Fed a bit of an assist on controlling inflation, but a slumping Chinese economy is clearly not good news for global growth.
Hey, Tom, over the last several years, the Chinese government really cracked down on some of the tech companies, the leading technology companies in China that had listed their shares in the West, costing a lot of investors, including Western investors, a lot of money in losses. Is there any sense that crackdown upon some of the big tech companies in China is contributing to maybe a softer than expected kind of reopening?
Yeah, so I think that the investors in the West didn't get the story on China's tech crackdown quite right. I think the view on Wall Street was, this is Xi Jinping against the entrepreneurs. This is the Communist Party against the markets. I think, in fact, what